All right. So have you heard about this whole thing going around about billionaires and dismantling social safety nets?
Yeah, it's a pretty hot topic right now.
Yeah, it sounds kind of dramatic at first, right?
Yeah, definitely a little bit dramatic. But, when you have figures like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy.
Well, they've been all over the place.
Exactly. They've been getting a lot of attention, particularly in Republican circles.
Yeah.
Pushing for these major government spending cuts.
Big time.
It's something we need to pay attention to, I think.
It definitely raises some eyebrows.
For sure.
So before we get into all the nitty-gritty details here, if you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Yeah, we'd really appreciate that.
Now let's dive in and try to understand this efficiency argument that's being thrown around.
Okay.
What exactly are Musk and Ramaswamy talking about when they use that word?
Right.
And how does it connect to these massive spending cuts they're proposing?
Well, they're calling for a whopping $2.5 trillion in cuts.
2.5 trillion.
Yeah, that's a huge number.
Huge.
To give you some context, the entire discretionary spending budget, the part that Congress actually controls every year,
Right.
is $2.5 trillion.
Whoa, so you're saying...
So basically what the source we're looking at is suggesting is that it would be pretty much impossible
Okay.
to make those kinds of cuts without dipping into mandatory spending programs.
Like what?
Things like Social Security and Medicare.
So the idea is that they would essentially slash these programs
Potentially.
to make room in the budget for those big tax cuts that often benefit the wealthy.
That seems to be the argument.
It feels like a reverse Robin Hood situation.
You could say that.
Take from the needy and give to the rich.
It's not a new concept either.
Really?
We saw something similar back in the Reagan era with the Grace Commission.
Oh, right. I vaguely remember that.
They also proposed some pretty hefty cuts to social programs.
This idea of shrinking the government to benefit the wealthy seems to keep coming back around.
It definitely has a history.
It's interesting, though, because we're talking about Elon Musk here, a guy who's been pretty outspoken about government inefficiency.
Yeah.
Isn't there a little irony in that, considering how much he's benefited from government subsidies?
That's a good point.
We're talking billions of dollars in subsidies for Tesla and SpaceX.
Billions with a B.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So does knowing that change your perspective on his arguments at all?
That's a great question. I'd love to hear what our listeners think about that.
Yeah. Does Musk's reliance on government support undercut his calls for slashing social programs?
It's definitely something to consider.
It's a bit of a head scratcher, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the potential impact of these proposed cuts.
Okay.
What would it actually mean for everyday Americans if these proposals became reality?
Well, the source paints a pretty stark picture.
Oh, no.
We could see things like reduced Social Security benefits, a higher retirement age cuts to cost of living adjustments.
Wow.
Basically making it a lot harder for people to retire comfortably and just afford basic necessities.
That's concerning.
It's not just theoretical either.
Really?
The source mentions some specific possibilities like reducing benefits for higher earners or raising the retirement age to 70.
70.
These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
These represent real impacts on people's lives.
Absolutely. It's important to remember
It's
that.
people's livelihoods we're talking about.
Yeah, and we have to contrast that with how the ultra-wealthy would benefit from these proposed tax cuts.
Right. It's two sides of the same coin.
It raises some serious questions about fairness and who really ends up shouldering the burden of these policy decisions.
For sure.
If you're finding this analysis insightful, don't forget to hit that like button.
Yeah, we appreciate your support.
It helps us reach more people and keep these conversations going.
Absolutely. The more the merrier.
Exactly.
Let's keep this dialogue going. Here's the thing, though. It seems like this whole strategy of talking about efficiency while going after social programs might be backfiring.
Yeah, the source we're looking at actually points that out.
Really?
Yeah, it seems like even though these policies could really benefit the ultra-wealthy, they're not exactly winning over the public.
Huh, interesting.
Ramaswamy's campaign was all about these ideas.
Right.
But it really struggled to get any momentum.
Yeah, I remember that.
And you see all these polls showing strong public support for taxing the wealthy to fund those essential services.
So it sounds like we have this disconnect, right? You have these influential figures pushing these proposals.
Right.
But the public doesn't seem to be buying it.
It's a bit of a puzzle.
Why do you think these ideas are gaining any traction at all if most Americans don't even want them?
Well, it's complicated, but I think it really highlights how policy decisions aren't always driven by public opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You have to factor in things like Lobbying efforts, campaign financing, and how the media frames these issues. It's like a whole system.
Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem.
And it's easy to feel like your voice gets lost in all of that.
It definitely can.
So what you're saying is that staying informed and engaged is crucial if we want to have any say in shaping the future.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
The more informed we are as citizens, the better equipped we are to hold our leaders accountable
I think that's a great point.
and advocate for the policies that we believe in.
Yeah, this isn't just some theoretical debate happening in a vacuum.
Yeah, not at all.
These are real policies with real consequences for people's lives.
Absolutely. It's about people's livelihoods, their well-being.
This whole conversation reminds me of those historical parallels we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah, like the Grace Commission.
Exactly. Their recommendations were ultimately rejected by Congress.
Right, largely because of public opposition.
And that shows you that public pressure can be a powerful force in shaping policy outcomes.
It definitely can. The Grace Commission is a perfect example of that. Even when you have these big names pushing for these drastic cuts,
Yeah.
a well-informed and engaged public can push back.
It's inspiring in a way.
It is. It's a reminder that we have a voice.
What I find really fascinating about this whole debate is that it goes beyond just the numbers.
Beyond the dollars and cents.
Exactly. It gets at these fundamental questions about the role of government in society.
It's about our values as a society.
What do we as a society owe to each other?
Right. What level of support do we want to provide for the most vulnerable among us?
What kind of safety net do we want to have in place?
These are big questions.
Huge questions.
And the answers have implications for everyone.
it makes you think.
It really does.
It's not just about balancing budgets.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It's about defining our values as a nation.
Exactly. Are we a society that prioritizes individual responsibility above all else?
Or do we believe in collective responsibility and supporting those in need?
That's the heart of the matter.
It's a tough conversation to have.
It is, but it's a necessary one.
If these proposals keep gaining traction, even though they seem unpopular, what could the long-term consequences be?
Well, we could potentially see a pretty significant shift in the social contract.
Oh, wow.
You know, a shrinking of the safety net that millions of people rely on,
Yeah,
and a widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
that's a scary thought.
It's not just about the immediate impact of those reduced benefits.
Right.
It's about the long-term erosion of social mobility and economic security for a huge chunk of the population.
It's a sobering thought, for sure.
It really is.
And it just underscores how important it is to stay informed and participate in these discussions.
We can't just sit on the sidelines.
We need to be asking these tough questions about the kind of society we want to live in.
And the role we want government to play in our lives.
These are choices we're making as a nation.
Choices that will have consequences for generations to come.
Yeah, it feels like we're at this kind of crossroads right now.
Yeah, like a turning point.
Like the decisions we make today are going to have this ripple effect for years to come.
Absolutely. They could shape the future.
So what can we even do? Like, how can we make our voices heard?
Right. How can we make sure that everyday people's needs are being considered in these policy discussions?
It feels like such a big system.
It is, but we're not powerless.
Okay, so what can we do?
Well, first and foremost, stay informed, right?
Okay.
That's like the foundation of everything.
Makes sense.
Read, listen, seek out different perspectives,
Yeah.
Don't just take things at face value.
Question everything.
Exactly. And then engage. Talk to people,
Yeah.
your friends, your family, write to your elected officials.
Get involved.
Exactly. Participate in community forums. Support organizations that align with your values.
Yeah, all those things.
Every voice matters in this.
I think sometimes people feel like, oh, my vote doesn't matter or my voice doesn't matter.
Right? Like they're just one person.
But it all adds up.
It really does.
And you don't need a PhD in economics to have a valid opinion, right?
No, not at all.
Your lived experiences, your values, your hopes for the future,
Those are all important.
those are all valuable contributions to this conversation.
Absolutely. So don't underestimate the power of sharing your perspective.
It's easy to feel small in all of this.
I know. But remember, collective action is powerful.
Yeah, there's strength in numbers,
When we come together and raise our voices, we can make a difference.
like we were talking about with the Grace Commission.
Exactly. Public
Yeah.
pressure can be a powerful force.
That's a good reminder.
It's a reminder that we're not powerless.
Well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation, I have to say.
Yeah, it's been great talking about this.
If you found this analysis helpful and thought-provoking, like we hope you did,
We hope so.
please consider subscribing and leaving a like.
Yeah, we'd really appreciate that.
It helps us reach a wider audience and keep these important conversations going.
We want to keep this dialogue alive.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
The future is ours to shape.